Think forward. Think Research Channel.
We'll hear from global experts on contour farming, no-till or minimal-till farming, using cover crops and crop rotation, organic farming, farmland buffer zones, the use of biotechnology, and the use of herbicides and pesticides. A farmer tilling his field, the soil turns and is prepared for seed and growing a crop. Farmers have always broken up the soil since the day humans learned to grow food. What does this, the age-old practice of a farmer tilling his field, have to do with this? These grim, sad images from Africa, the ones we see year after endless year of the millions with no food.
It's bad. You know, the food situation in Africa is bad. For example, in southern Africa, there's 14 southern African countries. At any one time, at least 6 of them are usually receiving food aid.
People are wasted, children are dying, and those are a combination of inadequate food with health situation and other, sickness and, war-related, whole host of things that leads to chronic famine that right now 800 million people in the world are dealing with, according to United Nations estimates.
The land in underdeveloped countries is a victim of these circumstances.
If anybody's ever seen a picture of a land after the famine passed through, there are no birds, there are no mice. Everything's been stripped bare by people desperate to stay alive.
The world faces a future that will need more food for a growing global population. In this century, it's expected we'll have to grow double the amount of food we grow now. But all the world's good farmland, and a lot of bad farmland, is already in use. And the demand for more farmland could put the remaining wilderness areas in jeopardy.
The next 40 years are the crucial time. Not so much for people, it's the crucial time for wildlife habitat. We're already farming 37% of the Earth's land area. We're already farming most of the good land like this. We are already using green revolution technologies, improved seeds, improved pest control, complete roster of plant nutrients. How do we double it again or maybe triple it again from today in a short span of time?
What does this have to do with farmers tilling their fields as they did from the earliest days of American, European, or even Asian and South American culture? Because here in these lands, if they farm, they often farm with primitive hand tools, pushing the dust around, hopelessly try to make seeds turn to food on small plots of land. In the lush Coon Creek Valley in the upper reaches of the Mississippi on the west side of Wisconsin, we come to the village of Chaseburg, population just over 400. Around here you visit some of the richest farmland in the world. The original Chaseburg of a century ago is buried by soil eroded from the surrounding hills, an agricultural disaster that provides valuable lessons for those who grow food today. Professor Stanley Trimble and his graduate students have been studying the lessons of Chaseburg for some 30 years.
What we're seeing here is the upper part of the old turbine pit of the village mill.
We discover that an entire 19th century flour and lumber mill is buried beneath us.
We excavated that mill dam, or parts of it, so that the entire machinery of the grist mill lies beneath my feet.
We explore the rest of Chaseburg to find that much of this is not the original village at all. That entire buildings from 100 years ago are buried beneath the ground.
The present road is way up here, but the old road was about 8 or 10 feet below what it is right now. Here's the location of the house built by Mr. Martini, which was buried.
The original village of Chaseburg, Wisconsin is buried by sediment carried through the valley by Coon Creek, part of the Mississippi watershed. A village founded in the 1850s, buried by waterborne sediment by the 1930s, the Depression years. It was at the same time as the Dust Bowl of the Dirty 30s, to the west of here, where the winds picked up black topsoil from the plains and blew it as far as Chicago and Washington.
And they estimate there was 4 pounds of dust for every resident in Chicago just from that one dust storm.
I mean, there were dust clouds from the Dust Bowl that blackened the skies of Washington, D.C. Ships in the Atlantic Ocean, the upper westerlies picked up this dust. Ships in the Atlantic Ocean had dust falling on them from Kansas.
Dust bowls still happen. There was one very recently.
In April of 2002, there was a huge dust cloud, similar to the sorts of thing that we talk about with the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. And from NASA satellites, we could see it. We could see this kind of yellow haze. And that was all this soil being blown from China through wind erosion.
And today in Africa, the phenomenon we learned about in Chaseburg, Wisconsin, goes on today.
Well, in the areas right near Lake Victoria that I visited, there were gullies that were developing that were in the order of 50 to 100 feet deep.
Professor Dick Schultz of Iowa State is just back from Africa.
They basically have destroyed the farmland because associated with the gully usually is a high loss of soil in the immediate vicinity of that gully. And so they've lost their topsoil. They're down to what we call the parent material, and that usually is very difficult to farm. And so these people, there's dramatic potential there for starvation, failed crops from year to year.
In so many parts of the world, when the land has been ruined, the farmer abandons the farm.
They walk off the land because it can no longer provide a livelihood for the families there. And nobody wants to buy it because it can't do anything anymore.
This brings us back to the farmer tilling his field with a tractor or a horse, or even the subsistence farmer hacking away with a handheld hoe. They need better ideas. The farmers here in Wisconsin, whose rich soil washed into the Coon Creek Valley, thought about how they once tilled their fields.
There was almost a fetish about plowing straight rows that were in accord with these rectangular landscapes. But what this meant is that a lot of rows were up and downhill. That is, farmers were actually plowing furrows up and downhill, and this led to severe erosion.
They discovered that if they changed their fields to follow the contours of the land, it preserved and built the topsoil.
From almost no contour farming in the mid-1930s, by mid-1950s, almost everyone was contour farming. American landscape here and in many places transformed from a rectangular landscape based on the land survey to one of contouring based on good conservation practices.
Contour farming is practiced today in all developed and most developing countries. But still, when you visit modern Western-style farms, you see ugly streams gashed through the land, the water filled with nutrients, herbicides, and pesticides washed off the land. It costs farmers money because they have to add more fertilizers to restore the wasted nutrients. And it's bad for the environment. More must be done than tilling and contours. At the U.S. Department of Agriculture Research Farm in Beltsville, Maryland, there are crops growing in fields that use no-till or minimal-till farming. It's said to reduce soil erosion by 65 to 95%.
The plow has been the symbol of farming, and farmers themselves are just violently upset at the idea of giving it up. But it's bare earth farming.
Farmers who don't till or till less have a variety of strategies for building soil nutrients and fighting weeds and pests. Some rotate crops, others don't.
With no-till, you can either rotate crops or you can do a continuous crop like corn. And some farmers do, and with modern fertilizers, you put a complete menu, nitrogen, phosphate, potash, and 26 trace minerals back into the soil to replace what the crop takes out, and you're leaving a lot of organic matter, the corn stalks, the leaves from the corn, the root system, that's all remaining there in the field, in the topsoil. Even without crop rotation, It creates a better topsoil than continuous corn used to when we were plowing.
By rotating crops, the need for fertilizer can be reduced. For example, after a farmer harvests the summer corn crop, in September he might seed the field with a winter cover crop such as rye or hairy vetch, which grows in the fall and early spring, restoring nitrogen to the soil.
Cover crops are plants that are not cash crops in themselves, but they provide various ecological services. They provide benefits that in the long run make our agricultural systems more sustainable. They also enhance the infiltration of water. Having a layer of residue that's left on the surface of the soil will prevent the impact of raindrops, prevent that soil surface from being compacted, allow water to infiltrate into the soil. The residue then prevents evaporation, so it holds moisture, provides more moisture for the crop.
By not tilling the field and by planting a rotation of crops, we have some answers for declining farmlands. Less tillage also means less tractor fuel costs and savings on nutrient fertilizers. Some advocate no-till organic practices, enriching soil with manure and crop rotation.
It's really based on the concept of building up the soil. There's several tools that we use to build up the soil. One of them is crop rotations. We have to rotate our crops in an organic system because we are trying to prevent weeds, disease, and insect populations from building up to the point where they become an economic problem for us. Rotations will do that for us. The other thing that we do is we try to think of the soil as being alive. The soil is actually a living, breathing organism, or at least filled with living and breathing organisms in the form of microbes and earthworms and all kinds of critters down there, plant roots. And if the soil is alive, then we really have to feed it. So we feed it through cover crops, compost, and of course crop rotations.
The Rodale Institute Farms, based in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, focus on the development of organic farming techniques. 2 clumps of soil, one from a traditional tilled field which uses a diet of chemicals, is compared to one from an organic no-tilled field that uses rotated crops and natural sources of nutrients.
If we farm the soil differently, treat it differently, we begin to see differences in the soil. Different amounts of soil organic matter, a different amount of carbon in the soil, and the roots of the plant actually can take advantage of those differences. So when we grab a handful of soil, as you mentioned, kindergarten children can see the difference. You can smell the difference, the plant roots can tell the difference, and what we're trying to do now is working with scientists around the world is develop scientific tests that can start to analyze those differences so we can put a real number with them, and that'll help farmers move in a more positive direction.
It's often been said that the reason a farmer tills the field is to control weeds, and the reason he sprays the crop is to control both weeds and pests. Researchers are trying different techniques that make weed and pest control more effective.
The benefit of cover crops and of the minimum tillage, no tillage practices that go with them, I think is in building the soil base on which we conduct our agriculture. I think they can also be used to reduce weed and pest populations. One goal we have is to try to reduce the chemical inputs as much as possible. I think this is important not only from an environmental standpoint to protect resources, water, air, but also I think for in the developing countries where the economic means is not there to buy a lot of these inputs.
Across the fields of Iowa, we see another natural way of preserving the soil and nutrients. They call this a natural buffer. These wildflowers, the butterflies and birds, the complex ecosystem of plants, trees, and wildlife did not exist a few years ago. The creek was polluted, silt-filled, and dying. 2 farm families, Iowa State University, the Trees Forever organization, and others, teamed together to bring new life to the creek.
Well, I think the ultimate goal is to provide some benefits to the landowners and keep the soil on their land and keep those lands productive and keep them in agriculture. And if we can do that and also combine that with reducing some of those negative consequences, keeping the soil, keeping the nutrients on the land where they can be used and improving that local
health of that stream or that lake or that downstream water body. I think that that's a great win-win situation.
This Iowa Creek experiment's been so successful, it's being emulated on farmland across the U.S. In South Africa, Dr. Jocelyn Webster and the Africa Bio Organization know that farmers need low-cost, easy-to-apply solutions for the food crisis facing Africa. Africa Bio favors genetically modified crops, plants that are engineered to need less water, fewer treatments of nutrients, and to resist weeds and pests.
The benefit of the technology at the moment is that the inputs that you would normally have to spray on to protect your crop from insects, for example, and from weeds, those particular traits are already in the seed. So the farmer has the seed and he can plant the seed and he does not have to worry about spraying, for example, for particular insect pests.
There are a number of genetically modified crops which yield practical results. Corn and cotton, which are genetically resistant to insects and herbicides. By creating plants that are resistant to herbicides, farmers can spray for weeds and not harm the crop, which supports higher yields.
The benefits are becoming to be quite significant. You know, we're saving billions as far as costs in various different applications of insecticide. We are also having greater yields, so the yield increase is beneficial. Some of the studies that have been done show that it's very beneficial to the whole community. If small-scale farmers are using these products, they generally have a lot more income. They can use that income to look after their families properly, and they grow the community as a whole.
In Egypt, they added a gene from the barley plant to the wheat plant, and now they have a wheat variety that needs 1 irrigation per year instead of 8. Way more water efficient.
At the USDA labs outside Washington, scientists develop genetic modifications to agricultural crops. In addition to reducing plants' need for water and nutrients, making them weed and pest resistant, they work to make crops more bountiful, more flavorful, and they work to make them healthier to eat, to help us fight off disease.
What GM can do is enhance the levels of these anti-cancer nutrients like lycopene, vitamin E, and be able to provide the human health benefits by preventing chronic illnesses. And this, along with that value addition to the crops, you can also have higher yields.
I think we've just come to the point now in our understanding of genetics where we're getting a handle on a lot of the genes that control things like disease resistance, drought tolerance. We can develop cover crops that have enhanced ability to suppress weeds and pests, as well as root systems to capture nutrients.
There are people who are against the use of genetically modified crops for food.
There's no evidence. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has done a study on this and got no evidence that these particular crops and foods produced from them are any different as far as safety is concerned.
Almost every crop that we're planting has been genetically modified by hundreds of years of selective breeding and crossbreeding.
So far we have not seen any thing that would be very bad for the environment or bad for the human consumption. That's one thing. Second thing is that I think that genetic modification, the way it's done these days, is much more precise, much more directed, and the scientists have a more control on what they're doing.
The issues and answers that could move us from famine to feast. Biotechnology and genetic modification, successful with many crops such as corn, soybeans, and tomatoes, still at the experimental stage with many others. No tillage or minimal tillage. Whether farmers should plow their fields, it builds back the soil, but how to control weeds and control pests. Crop rotation. For many crops, it diminishes weeds and pests and builds the soil, but does it make sense for farmers in all parts of the world? Contour farming and buffer zones, they dramatically reduce erosion of soils and nutrients and enhance the waterways and the environment. Nutrients, herbicides, and pesticides, and the organic farming community. Can we find a balance between modern plant treatments and trying to do everything naturally that will feed everybody efficiently, maximizing the farmland we have, at the same time protecting the wildlands?
We don't know if we've got the technology and the resources we'll need. We think we have them. As I say, we're already using the Green Revolution stuff on virtually all of the world's good land. And if we're going to double again, then we've got to apply something new. The technology that we have, that we're only beginning to find out about and apply, is biotechnology. And it's controversial. But famine is controversial too, and destroying all of your wildlife to avoid using a technology is probably going to be controversial.
I wouldn't say this is a solution for all those hungry people in refugee camps. I would say this is a solution for bringing African countries into modern agriculture.
Economic challenges are difficult to address. Climatic changes may be impossible, but education is possible.
Any kind of, techniques that doesn't require a whole lot of, extra investment for them, because they are really poor, the asset is very poor. Any kind of techniques that simply they can just sort of rotate, use organic, things that are on farm for the smaller scale, I think would benefit them dramatically.
I don't believe in one-size-fits-all type of agriculture, or bringing any sort of dogma that we try to apply to all parts of the world.
The opportunity in the future tremendous. You cannot fathom it, fathomless. What in next 20 years you will see in GM, you cannot even predict today. It's tremendous.
Farmers around the world and publics around the world need to understand that we have this enormous additional challenge for the next 40 or 50 years. We've got to marshal the technologies and the institutional structures and the regulatory framework so that all of these tools can be used effectively. If we don't do that, we're going to have famine. If we do it well, we'll have feast.
Syngenta has provided funding for this program. Syngenta, committed to sustainable agriculture, committed to improving life.